It took one single shot in the dark to turn a celebrated lawman into a frontier villain. Pat Garrett was the sheriff who killed the notorious outlaw Billy the Kid. He did his sworn duty, eliminating a multiple murderer and bringing an end to one of the West's most infamous crime sprees. Yet the public didn't celebrate his act. They scorned it. Why? Because the killing didn't happen in a glorious face-to-face duel as the emerging Western myth demanded. It happened in the shadows, like an ambush. That single moment of narrative failure changed Pat Garrett's entire legacy, and his story reveals a crucial truth about the Old West that Hollywood rarely shows us. On the American frontier, infamy was often more profitable and enduring than integrity. Welcome to the Black Ledger of the Old West. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on the most infamous bounty hunters and manhunters of the American frontier, the men who blurred the line between law, mercenary work, and outright murder. We will show how private corporations, political ambition, and a love for sensational stories created a class of manhunters whose ruthless methods were actively tolerated and even celebrated until they became politically inconvenient. The corporate hand, Pinkerton's private army. The story of frontier manhunting is inseparable from the history of capitalism and corporate security. Centralized law enforcement was often spread too thin to police the vast, untamed territories, and this vacuum was quickly filled by private entities. The pursuit of fugitives was, at its heart, an economic endeavor. While small-time criminals might carry a modest $50 bounty, notorious figures like Jesse James commanded massive rewards of up to $10,000. This enormous inflation in rewards wasn't driven by the government. It was funded by powerful private corporations, especially railroads and banks, who saw the capture of criminals preying on their assets as essential risk management. This is where the Pinkerton National Detective Agency came in. Established around 1850, Pinkertons quickly grew into the largest private law enforcement organization in the world. Their foundational success was tied directly to the burgeoning infrastructure of the nation. Their first major contracts came from consolidated railroad companies in 1855, who paid large fees to establish a security bureau across their vast, unprotected territories. This corporate investment signaled a significant shift. Powerful economic entities were taking on quasi-sovereign power by funding private armies to enforce their security interests. The U.S. government itself employed Pinkerton agents after the Civil War to track down outlaws like the James Brothers and the Wild Bunch. One of their most recognized agents was Charlie Siringo, a former cowboy who became a detective and author. Siringo was a master of bureaucratic efficiency, not the mythic lone gunfighter. His methods involved creating extensive informant networks, distributing detailed wanted circulars with descriptions and multiple aliases, and leveraging institutional intelligence. He logged 25,000 miles over 4 years in his relentless pursuit of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. However, the Pinkertons' lasting infamy is derived from their role in industrial conflict. After the Civil War, they systematically pivoted their vast organization and ruthless methods against organized labor. They infiltrated unions, provided armed guards, and recruited violent squads to intimidate workers. The agency reached a nadir in public perception during the Homestead Strike of 1892, where their violent deployment against Carnegie steel workers solidified their reputation not just as lawmen, but as an oppressive corporate force aligned against the working class. The message was clear. The professionalized manhunting skills developed on the frontier were ultimately tools for protecting capital. The archetype of the hired killer, Tom Horn. If the Pinkertons represented the institutionalization of corporate violence, Tom Horn stood as the most notorious example of a bounty hunter who transitioned fully into a contract killer. Horn had peerless frontier skills, having served as an Army scout and interpreter during the Apache Wars, even helping translate the terms of Geronimo's surrender. These talents led him briefly to the Pinkerton Agency. They hired him to track down and apprehend outlaws, violently if necessary, who threatened their corporate clients. Yet Horn's propensity for extreme violence proved too great even for the largest private police force in the world. Conscious of their public image, the Pinkertons forced him to resign after only 4 years. After leaving the Pinkertons, Horn immediately found work that fully utilized his deadly specialty, becoming a stock detective or hired killer for the wealthy Wyoming Cattlemen's Association in 1894. This was during the brutal Johnson County War, where the powerful cattle barons were fighting small farmers, sheep ranchers, and alleged rustlers. The Cattlemen's Association paid Horn a staggering fee of $500 to $600 per killing to ambush and murder marked men, turning him into a serial killer by contract. He is suspected of murdering up to 17 men, operating purely as an instrument of economic warfare. Horn's end came in 1933 in Cheyenne, East Wyoming, after he was convicted for the murder of 14-year-old Willie Nickel. The prosecution's case rested on a dubious, drunken confession Horn allegedly made to a deputy marshal who had secretly arranged for a stenographer to record the conversation. Even though many historians still debate his guilt in that specific murder, and his evidence would be inadmissible in modern courts, the trial was likely a political sacrifice. By the early 1900s, public opinion had turned against the cattle barons who employed him. Horn, the infamous instrument of their extra-legal violence, became necessary collateral damage, a signal that the frontier courts needed to restore a semblance of public legitimacy. He was hanged, not just for a single killing, but for what he represented. The outlaw who wore a badge, Frank Canton. Frank Canton represents the ultimate moral contradiction of the frontier, a man who reinvented himself from a notorious outlaw into a celebrated lawman, yet leveraged that new authority to commit the same ruthless acts on behalf of the powerful elite. Born Josiah Horner in 1849, he was the outlaw leader of the Horner Gang, which terrorized North Texas in the 1870s. After escaping prison, Horner completely changed his identity, emerging as Frank Canton, a relentless pursuer of evildoers who worked as a detective, sheriff, and deputy U.S. Marshal across 3 territories. This reinvention demonstrates the frontier's unique capacity to sanitize a violent past if that violence could be channeled into the service of authority and corporate interests. Canton's most infamous and consequential acts were committed in his capacity as a hired field commander for the Wyoming Stock Growers Association during the Johnson County War of 1892. This was the same conflict where Tom Horn was operating. The Stock Growers Association hired dozens of imported gunmen called invaders for a vigilante campaign intended to murder scores of settlers and small ranchers who challenged the cattle barons' dominance. Canton directed these gunmen, using his official status as a deputy U.S. Marshal, to organize and lead a force of private assassins in what was essentially a campaign of domestic terrorism. Despite their central roles in what amounted to contract murder, Canton and the other invaders were eventually freed without repercussions, likely due to the enormous legal expenses, over $100,000 in that time, paid by the wealthy barons to secure their impunity. Canton himself used his lawman connections to leave the state without penalty. His ultimate success in maintaining a veneer of respectability, despite his participation in contract murder, proves that on the frontier, efficiency and ruthlessness were often valued over integrity by the powerful interests he served. The stories of Tom Horn and Frank Canton illustrate how the legal system provided political cover for murder commissioned by the wealthy elite. The essential contrast, Bass Reeves. To truly understand the moral stain of men like Horn and Canton, it is essential to look at a figure who achieved legendary status through professional integrity and sheer competence, Deputy U.S. Marshal Bass Reeves. Born into slavery, Reeves found refuge in the Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma, during the Civil War. In 1875, he was commissioned as one of the first black federal lawmen west of the Mississippi River. His jurisdiction covered the notoriously dangerous 75,000 square mile Indian Territory, an area where over 120 federal officers would ultimately perish. Reeves's success stemmed from his formidable skills and an unwavering ethical compass. Standing 6 feet 2 inches and weighing 180 pounds, He was renowned for his ambidextrous marksmanship. Despite being illiterate due to his background, he memorized warrants and successfully arrested over 3,000 fugitives over his 32-year tenure. Unlike the notorious Manhunters, Reeves was known for creative, non-brutal apprehension methods. He was a master of disguise, frequently adopting the persona of a preacher or a farmer to approach fugitives undetected, confirm their identity, and make the arrest. His moral clarity was absolute, demonstrated most powerfully when he arrested his own son, who was later convicted for murder. Reeves enforced the law without exception, regardless of personal cost or relationship. In one challenging legal incident in 1887, Reeves was tried for the murder of his trail cook. He claimed the shooting was an accident involving a misfired rifle cartridge. Unlike Tom Horn, who was hanged based on a dubious confession, Reeves was acquitted by the jury, which accepted his testimony as a credible account of a tragic accident. Reeves's legacy, marked by courage, devotion to duty, and historical importance as a pioneering black lawman, provides the essential contrast to the infamous contract killers. His story demonstrates that extreme competence and survival on the dangerous frontier did not inherently require moral compromise or infamy. The enduring infamy. The most infamous bounty hunters of the American frontier are those figures whose actions most clearly expose the fundamental hypocrisy and economic drivers underlying frontier justice. They were complex actors operating at the dangerous intersection of private capital and nascent governmental authority. Pat Garrett became infamous because of narrative failure. He eliminated a violent outlaw, but the manner of the killing failed to live up to the public's romanticized demand for a glorious theatrical duel. Tom Horn is stained by his corporate allegiance. He was a professional assassin whose peerless tracking skills were sold directly to wealthy cattle barons, demonstrating the use of frontier talent for organized economic violence. Frank Canton represents moral hypocrisy. He was a former outlaw who used a legitimate lawman's badge to command vigilante campaigns, proving that the badge could be used to grant impunity for murder. The history of these manhunters demonstrates that the Wild West was ultimately tamed not by righteous lone heroes, but by organized economic power, bureaucratic efficiency, and the gradual institutionalization of violence. The infamous manhunters were merely the instruments used during this painful transition, tools that were discarded or condemned when their methods became politically inconvenient. What do you make of the fact that men like Tom Horn and Frank Canton were hired and protected by wealthy corporate interests to commit murder, while a man like Pat Garrett was condemned for an act that was simply not dramatic enough for the public? Did the pursuit of profit truly turn the badge into a license to kill in the Old West? And which of these stories do you think Hollywood has failed to tell accurately? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We truly enjoy reading the majority of the comments and hearing your opinions on these deep historical questions. If you like this video, be sure to check out some more history we've covered, like the video in the top left corner, and make sure you hit the like button, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more unvarnished history of the American West.